Tak můžete.
So let me welcome you at our seminar. It is the last but one before Christmas. And the speakers of both seminars will be from our institute, from ÚFAL. But as far as I understand, the topics are pretty different. Today, we will be concerned with historical data. And next week, we will turn to a kind of multilingual machine translation, etc. Topic. So welcome, Dan. Welcome all of you and welcome all those who are online. And Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I promised to do this in English on demand, and I believe I see several people who represent the demand, so we will do it in English. So this talk essentially is going to present a project that I've been involved in since like the beginning of this year, and with colleagues from other places in Prague. And so the name of the talk actually is the name of the project. It's History of Czech in Corpus Continuum. It's a TAČR funded project carried out by several institutions. So it's led by colleagues from the Czech National Corpus. Some of them are here today. And then still at Charles University, us, ÚFAL, and then the Institute of the Czech Language of the Academy of Science and the National Library. And if the name says Corpus Continuum for the history of Czech, it's not a coincidence that there are these institutions, because there are places where there are large corpora, or large is relative in historical linguistics, but large diachronic corpora, like Czech National Corpus and the Institute of the Czech Language. And then there are places like us, where we have developed richly annotated corpora. And now the goal should be to possibly develop diachronic corpora, which will also be richly annotated, at least at some levels. At ÚFAL, it's actually me and Bára, and we are in different teams in the project. So what I will be presenting today, actually, I'm not directly collaborating with Bára on that topic. So I will structure the talk into roughly 3 parts. I will first try to present the goals a little bit more in detail. And then I will focus on the oldest stage of Czech, for which we have some data, Old Czech. And I will first show the workflow, how we approach the annotation together with colleagues from the Institute of the Czech Language. And then what are the interesting issues that we had to discuss and find solutions for. So first, the goals. To motivate it, I will show you a screenshot from the website of the Czech National Corpus, from the context application, where you can search various corpora. And this one is from SIN 2015. And my main point here is that depending on your preferences, you can set various attributes that you want to search for or that you want to see in your output. So here, it's just a random query where I asked for the occurrences of the word dva, two. And as you can see, for the word and its neighbors, I have selected that I want to have the lemma of each of them and also the positional morphological tag. And not only I can see it in the output, but I can also use it in my query. So I can ask for all occurrences of the word va followed by something in accusative, for instance. And All these annotations are actually done automatically because there's no one who would manually annotate 1 billion words, but the accuracy is pretty high, so you can still rely on it to a reasonable extent to find interesting patterns. So that's for the synchronous data we have. There are various other corpora, so there's intercorp. Here I just selected the Czech part of it, where you even have the morphological annotation according to the Universal Dependency standard, so that you can compare the annotations for Czech and the other languages that are there in parallel. So again, it's different annotation framework, but you still have the information there. And now there is diacorp, diachronic corpus, and you don't see these annotations there, not because I didn't select them, but simply because I couldn't select them, because currently they are not available. So we can just see the word forms. And if we search for something, we have to know what word forms we are looking for, and that's it. I guess we can probably use regular expressions to get several word forms together, but we still have to know what we are searching for. So that's the problem that we are trying to solve, to have something where we could train a model to take also historical data and then provide it here. We have taggers and lemmatizers for contemporary Czech. So we can apply them to historical Czech, and we have tried it actually. So you can get something, but that something will be so wrong that it really cannot be presented this way and used for linguists for their experiments. I have one more slide of this kind, this time from the website of the Institute of the Czech Language, from the application called Vokabulář webový, which presents the historical data from Old Czech. So again, I placed the same query there, got different formatting, but the main message is still the same. We can find words in context, but we cannot see any extra annotation of that. So that's what we want to change. So that's the main goal of the project, to find, to do annotation for text of all stages of Czech, not to annotate everything we have, that would still be a lot, but to annotate enough so that we can train a model and then use the model to predict the annotations for the rest, so that everything can be presented with lemmatization and with some kind of morphological annotation. Ideally, we would want to have that for syntactic annotation as well, but that goes beyond the scope of the current project because we simply will not have time to do syntax as well. We decided to do it in the annotation style of Universal Dependencies, so that again, it's comparable not just to other Slavic languages or other languages in general, but also so that we would have to find a common annotation standard across the centuries anyway, something which can cover all the grammatical stages of Czech, and the current annotation scheme we have for, let's say, Prague dependency tree bank would not be enough. So we would have to extend it anyway. The Institute of the Czech Language have their own text set, which resembles the one we use for PDT, but it's not the same. So you would have to standardize anyway. So that's one of the reasons why UD. This is probably for in a long time the first talk where I'm not going to give you an introduction to UD. So I suppose you already know about it enough. And as I said, only morphology. And so when I say large enough, we decided that 100,000 words should probably be large enough to train a model which would deliver decent accuracy. So we call this etalon, or in NLP you would call it gold standard. And that's 100,000 words per period. So it's not for the whole history of Czech, but rather for the periods which I will show in a minute. For each of them, we want to have a separate etalon so that we could combine them if we want to, but we want to have something which will really cover that period as closely as possible, because as all of you know, the closer your training data to your test data, the better results. And then the assumption is that one of the outcomes of the project will be the models for UDPipe, which will be freely available. I suppose the data will then be available in a similar manner as they are available now online for searching, but now with the annotation. Unfortunately, we are not allowed to make the data available for download for anyone. So that, like, the current arrangement with the various providers does not allow that. And as I said, the sources of data is essentially Czech National Corpus and the Institute of Czech Language. And then I will not talk much about the National Library, but I will talk about them now. They are important data provider for us for some of the periods, not all Czech, but I think the first half of 20th century is the main period where we need them. So they are preparing the data. I don't think they will be doing any annotation. That will be our task or Czech National Corpus task, but we need the data because we don't have data for all the periods yet. Okay, so now a brief overview of the history of Czech language. Take this as a simplification because I guess we could have endless debates about how incorrect it possibly is. So if I go to the deepest history possible, Proto-Slavic would be considered as a predecessor of Czech. As you probably guess, we don't have any data from that period, so that's like out of question. Then there is actually data for Old Czech Slavonic, and it's already in Universal Dependencies. So that's something we can compare to. But Old Czech Slavonic is not the direct predecessor of Czech. It's rather related, or again, like probably there could be endless debates about that. So it's for comparison here, but it's definitely not part of this project. So again, that's not what we will focus on. And by the way, I've been told that in roughly the same period, there would be something called Proto-Czech, but again, that's something for which we don't have data. Because in those times, either documents were written in Old Czech Slavonic or in Latin, depending on where they were written. But for Czech, we may have some individual words somewhere, but definitely nothing large enough. So then we have these remaining periods, and I've actually now divided them a bit more because those are the periods for which we assume to have the separate etalons. So the 19th century is already split to two halves. I now don't know whether 1850 is the exact boundary which you work with, but I suppose that roughly that would be the case. And before that, we have much larger periods because there's also less data available. So we have one for Old Czech. You may remember that on the previous version of the slide, I had something like 12th century here, but in fact, we don't have much data before 1300. So I think the oldest thing we have there is around 1300 anyway. But it would be Old Czech before that, just we don't have the data. And from now on, I will actually focus in particular on Old Czech, and I will ignore the rest because as I said, in this year, I've been working mostly with colleagues from the Institute of the Czech Language on that period. When we are done with it, we will proceed to Middle Czech, but we haven't started with that yet. And I suppose the problems there will be probably similar because as we are getting closer to current language, I think the differences should be smaller and smaller. So we probably started with the biggest problems in the beginning, and then we should be happier and happier. Okay, so now the workflow that we have for the annotation. So first, what data we have. So my colleagues have selected texts that would be suitable for annotation because they have more than that. I think altogether the data that I've seen was something like 7 million tokens, and I don't know whether that was all they have or not for that period. That was actually for both Old and Middle Czech. So the selected part for the etalon or gold standard has over 100,000, is 122,000 tokens. And roughly currently, I know about 1,300 sentences, but this will probably change. And the number of sentences will change significantly because it hasn't been annotated yet. So I had some automatic sentence segmentation by UDpipe, And the data, sometimes that's where you don't have punctuation, so you don't know where exactly the sentence should stop. And if you count it would be almost 100 words per sentence, so it's probably not realistic. But the number of tokens should not change too much. And as for genres, there is a lot of religious text, Bible translations, psalms, prayers, sermons, but there's also various other sources, epic, chronicles, various regulations and law, also medicine, like handbooks of what to do when someone gets some symptoms, proverbs, dream books, just about everything. By the way, it's not balanced, I think. The colleagues, I guess, tried to make it at least somewhat balanced, but it's definitely not balanced in the way how you would expect it for synchronous data, simply because there's not so much data so that we could take the luxury of balancing carefully everything. Okay, so the actual workflow is I pre-processed the data with UDpipe so that not everything has to be done from scratch, so that there is some annotation and it has to be fixed rather than to write down everything. But as I said, we have only UDpipe trained on modern Czech. So there will be a significant amount of errors, and I will show you some of them. I even have some rule-based scripts which try to fix something that's more or less heritage from a previous pilot project that we did with colleagues from the Masaryk University. So it arbitrarily focuses on some frequent words like ška, which was there in the Bible translation almost in every other sentence. And UDpipe never knew what to do with it, so that the annotators don't have to re-annotate that word in every sentence, right? But we got the sentence segmentation, the initial one from UDpipe, and then lemmatization, part of speech tags, features, and even dependency relations, because that's a parsing model which includes syntax, even though we currently sort of ignore the syntactic output because we cannot do that now. So once it was pre-processed, we actually converted to a table, and that table is modified by the annotators in Excel or some other Office program. We have been discussing various annotation tools which we could possibly use for that. All of them would have to be adapted in various ways because they would not expect our set of labels. So in the end, I suggested that maybe a common Office program which everyone knows how to use would be useful enough. I can generate the features individually to its own column, which means that then if you are in the gender column and you just hit M, it will immediately give you masculine because it saw that you already had masculine somewhere up in the same column. So it should be reasonably quick. The downside of this is that this is a general application. It's not an annotation tool. So there are endless ways how something can go wrong. Just if the annotators do something which was not expected, then in the end, I can get a document which will not be processable. So we have some rules what not to touch, and it works. And then I have scripts which will take it back and convert it to CONU, which is the Universal Dependencies file format. And I will post-process it and then compute the difference because every file is annotated by 2 annotators. So then I will tell them what are the differences between their annotations line by line, individually for lemma and part of speech tag, whatever. Sometimes it's difference in that they decided that there should be different gender, let's say. Sometimes they just did not annotate one of the features while the other annotator did. And if you remember how it was, how the workflow started, I generated it with UDpipe. So sometimes it's possible that UDpipe decided it's a word, maybe it was a noun, and in fact it was a verb. So then someone decided, yeah, it's a verb, so I will change the part of speech tag, but then they forget that the verb should have some other features annotated and some of the nominal features should be deleted. So that's why we often have differences in that something is empty for one annotator and non-empty for the other. So then they get this back. One of the annotators goes over it and provides the definitive version of that file. And it's not typically the end of the story, because I also have various validation scripts. So one of them is the official Universal Dependencies validator, but I have additional scripts tailored for the Czech annotation, which uses UDAPI by Martin Popel and has a block there which checks for each part of speech or subpart of speech what features we expect. So not only that features are allowed there, but if some feature is not annotated and we believe that it should always be there, then it will shout as well. So then we can generate highlighted bugs like this. Again, there are three structures, but you should ignore them because we ignore them currently. But the highlighted part, several kilometers here, will say there was a bug in feature gender, animacy, something. And then the annotators will get back to it. And maybe that was not in the differences because maybe it was a bug which was introduced by UDPipe, sorry, by the parser. And none of the annotators noticed it, so they didn't have a difference, but still it's an error. And finally, some of these highlighted bugs are actually not errors at all, because the script is developed on the fly. And originally, I started with the features that we have in modern Czech. And sometimes we have to discuss it, because sometimes there might be features which may be needed for old Czech, even though we didn't expect them in modern Czech. So then the outcome may be that the data will stay as it is, and I will have to modify the script. And this can loop several times, but typically after one iteration, we already have data set, which seems to be OK. So now a few words about the errors by the model that we use for preprocessing. I said we train it on modern Czech, or we train it. I take the model trained by Milan Straka. So in UD, we currently have 6 Czech tree banks. Here's the list. The last 2 of them are so small that they don't have training data. They are designed as only test. So that means that no model will be ever trained on this. And for the remaining ones, you can see that there are huge differences in sizes. So the largest one is PDT, which has 1.5 million words. And the genre here is the newswire text from the early 1990s. None of them is even close to any of the genre-wise or domain-wise to the data we are going to annotate. Then we have the Czech academic corpus from 1970s. Again, nonfiction. Then we have fiction in the fig tree corpus, over 166,000 words from Czech fiction. Again, end of 20th century and beginning of the 21st century. And we have a small tree bank of legal text. So essentially, I would say we use the model trained on PDT. And the fig tree would make sense as well, even though it's much smaller, but it's still large enough. And because it's fiction, it might be closer to some of the texts that we have there. So experiments with these two make more sense than with the others. But what we do now is we use the PDT one because that's the largest one. A few words about what can go wrong with this model. You will see more because I'll be discussing the issues we had with annotation later, and those are quite connected to this as well. So first, genre, as I said. It's trained on news, and then you apply it, say, to Bible. So even if I trained it on a modern translation of the Bible to Czech, it would be a problem because it's a different language. But if I trained it on news and applied it to the modern translation of the Bible, I would have a problem with the domain. So it's like 2 dimensions, and both of them are a problem. Old vocabulary, that's obvious, words that are no longer used. Orthography, I will have a few more slides about what it means, cleaning and transcribing orthography. But even if it's cleaned and transcribed, it still doesn't mean that we have modern word forms. So for instance, this is the reflexive pronoun sie, but the parser never saw it written this way because the accent should not be there in modern Czech. Surprisingly, it was actually able to annotate it correctly most of the time because the neural model just saw that reflexive would make sense here, and there's nothing so similar to a reflexive anyway. So in this case, it worked, but in other cases, it didn't. There are many things like IE instead of IE or E, depending on what word it is. So věce instead of více, that would be often wrong. And then there's grammar. Again, I will have more slides on that, like dual number, simple past tenses, forms that are never seen in modern Czech, converbs or přechodníky in Czech. They are very frequent there in comparison to current text and so on. I even have an example of a tree that came out of the parser. I think it may not be so much readable, and because I said that syntax is not our focus, I will just skip it. It is wrong, but it is not so wrong as I would expect. Instead, I will dwell for a minute on this. This is also the output of the model, but this focuses on lemmatization and the morphological annotation. It's one sentence, so it doesn't tell you what the real proportion would be on a larger span of the text, but it actually is quite amazing because you see, it's a short sentence, ale Kristovo porození tak běže, that's from Bible again, that means the birth of Jesus Christ went like this. And then I would say that only the highlighted parts are the wrong ones. So there is, porození is the birth, that's a noun, a verbal noun. It was able to figure out that there should be a noun here, even though the suffix is not the modern one. It got all the features correct. And then it guessed, okay, so probably the lemma should be the same as the form. And I don't see what the neural network thought, but my guess would be that in this case, it was not just because you just take the form if you don't know anything better. It might have actually learned that for neuter nouns in nominative, it is the case that you take the form and it's your lemma. So it took it, but since the lemma, if we want the modern one, would be the one with long E at the end, so that's one of the errors. Then běže is one of these simple past tenses that no longer exist in Czech, and so it never saw this form. It was still able to figure out that there should be a verb here. It even guessed something which looks like a verbal infinitive, běžet, even though there should be beat, to beat. And then again, many of the features are actually correct, but since it doesn't know simple past tenses, so it thought it would be present tense. So it's not so wrong as you would possibly expect. But I did select a sentence which looks so good. I have others which would be a headache for the annotators. Okay, and then last slide, I think, about the workflow is that we suppose that we will do some kind of bootstrapping, meaning that we will gradually get a better model for tagging and lemmatization even during the project, not only at the end. So now we already have 10 texts manually annotated and verified to annotators and then the validation. So those are data that would be suitable for training. It's already almost 20,000 words. And that's actually my next task on my to-do list. So I don't have the results yet, but I suppose that once I'm able to retrain the UDPipe parse integer on the large modern data plus the small old Czech data, I will get a model which will provide much better starting point for the annotators. So that's something that I hope to have soon so that they can test whether it helps them. And this could be done several times. So they will annotate more data and then we can retrain it again. The only experiment with numbers I have on this front are from an earlier experiment I did several years ago, even before the HiČKoK project, with Dresden Bible, the Gospel of Matthew, where so it's old experiment, so it's UDPipe 1.2, so it itself would be quite suboptimal even on modern Czech. And on old Czech, the lemmatization score was 70%, part of speech text 77, features 55. That's terrible. It could be slightly better with newer model of UDPy, but not so good. Like for modern Czech, you would expect over in the higher 90s, and that definitely would not be the case even with better parser. And then when I retrain this using the FIG tree, the fiction tree bank, so 160,000 words from modern Czech fiction, plus only 1,669 words of annotated Gospel of Matthew. It already jumped significantly. You can see lemmatization is now 78%, part of speech 85%, features 65%. So that gives us hope that if we now have 20,000 annotated words, we will see better improvement than this one. All right. So I'm going fast, but maybe now it will be a bit slower. So the last and maybe longest part is about the interesting issues that we faced and what we had to solve, to discuss and decide how it should be annotated. So first, I said that there is transcribed orthography for the data we have. To demonstrate it, I have here the sentence which sometimes has been presented as the oldest preserved Czech sentence, but it has been contested, so I will not go into all the details of that. But as an example, it will serve well. So up there on the picture, that's, I guess, from Wikipedia or from wherever, the actual picture of the parchment on which the sentence was found. So I guess I couldn't read even that, but this bullet point is the digitized version of that in the original spelling. So that's what we would get if we didn't have any transcription. And the second point presents what we actually have on the input before I start processing it. So that's the transcribed version, but it doesn't mean that it's translated to modern Czech, because then we wouldn't have anything to study. So to highlight it, to show you what the differences is, here we have, it's highlighted actually a lot because there are many characters which are different in the transcribed version versus in the original one. But this is really only to standardize the encoding of the assumed phonological value of the actual utterance. So there is already some level of interpretation because it's far from deterministic. So in many cases, the editors would have to decide what was the actual pronunciation. And again, that's definitely not my area of expertise, so I don't know how they do it. And there are probably some rules, but I guess there will be some room for their decisions, which could be debated. So that's what happened, and that's what we get. Now, I also have, for contrast, my own possible translation to modern Czech. So again, this is quite debatable because people could argue that it should be written differently. I have been criticized for using the instrumental down here because actually this is probably accusative, but that's how I would feel. It would be more natural if I had to utter this sentence. But it's not, again, to give you a fully scientific account of what exactly should be there, but rather to demonstrate how modern Czech still differs from even transcribed Old Czech. So there is this auxiliary jest would disappear, and then these various things in the modern Czech would be different. So there's prepositions which are missing from the old version, and there are these debatable case suffixes, and there's zemi instead of zemiu, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, there's still a lot of differences even after transcription. So that was the orthography. Now, we have three large areas of issues which we have to discuss, and we actually have a wiki page where we have all the records of what has been decided, because otherwise we would forget it. So one of them is tokenization, one of them is lemmatization, and the last one is morphological annotation of the features. So one by one, tokenization first. So there are many cases where a longer word seems to represent, or seems, it's quite sure that it represents multiple words which elsewhere would exist separately. and it would be easier to annotate them separately. And UD actually is quite suitable for that because it has, for various languages, it's needed. So it has the concept called multi-word tokens, where you have one orthographic word and you can split it to 2 or even more morphosyntactic words, which get their own annotation. The orthographic word is just preserved there so that you see what was originally in the sentence, but it's not even required that these pieces together concatenated will give you this one. No, you can interpret it again, and you can put there the word forms that you assume would be the most natural in that place if it wasn't merged together. At least that's what the UD guidelines assume and what is done in various UD datasets, but not in all. So in some datasets, and for some languages, people prefer to just split it somewhere and get the pieces at the forms. But then it would mean that sometimes you will have the form that will only appear in the merged versions and never as a separate word. So I have some examples where we already have this in modern Czech data in UD. Kdybychom is one of them, if we would. So there's like part of it is the subordinating conjunction, and the second part represents the form of conditional auxiliary, which also both of them exist separately. So it's debatable whether the form should be this or something else, but there is something as a subordinating conjunction, and we need a node for it in the tree structure, and we want to annotate it separately on morphological layer as well. Then there are various words which can have a clitic for second person auxiliary, like udělalas, you did, and the s at the end represents jsi, which would be the full auxiliary if you had it spelled out. Ses is a merger of the reflexive pronoun and the auxiliary, and there would be various others. I wanted to say many others, but you will not see many occurrences of them in the data we have, because think of it, this is second person. That's not something, even second person informal, that's not something you would find frequently in newswire text. So in PDT, I think if we have one occurrence, maybe not even that. In the fiction data, there will be more, but still it's not something you will see in every sentence. Kdybychom is a bit more frequent. So in PDT, we have quite a few instances of that, and abychom also, and aby, kdyby, and so on. So those are examples that we already have. Now, turns out that in old Czech data, we will have many more. So quite frequently, we have prepositions together with a short form of an accusative pronoun, like nač, oč. You could have proč as well, but I would say that's lexicalized, and it's used frequently in modern Czech, so we didn't want to split that one. But for most of the others, there's not much conflict with what we would have in modern Czech. There's even things like onž, which I haven't seen before until I saw this data. So then it projects into different pronouns that you select on the second position. So in this case, it would be a relative pronoun nějš, a form of jenž, while here would be a personal pronoun. And there are even things like skrzjenž, where skrzje apparently is the preposition that we now know as skrz, through, and so on. So we have a table of these to be able to refer to it. But essentially, this is done in such a way that the annotators will just mark that here is an aggregate of a preposition and a pronoun which should be split, which wasn't split because UDPipe didn't know that these forms exist. And then I gradually add these patterns when we encounter them, and I have the post-processing script will take care of it. Because it means that originally in the table there was one line, and now we need 2 lines. So the annotators don't have space where to put everything. But I know that there's always něj or nějš or co, so I have annotations for them, and I can insert them automatically. Another thing which occurs very frequently is the clitic ť, which we even had a tag for it in PDT, and when I was searching for it, I found exactly one occurrence in PDT. I think it was neniť, something like that. If I remember, and I saw the first description of the text that we use, it suggested that was a shortcut for the conjunction neboť. In the meantime, I've been educated that that's probably far from the correct interpretation, and then that maybe the best thing to do is to just keep as the form, because there doesn't seem to be anything which would fit well as its full word representation. And it seems to also have many different functions, like maybe sometimes a discourse connective, sometimes just emphasis, sometimes even personal pronoun ti. And then based on context, you would have to think of what it is. And this will actually have implications once we possibly work on syntactic annotation of this. But for now, we don't even try to say that it's a pronoun. We just mark it as a particle and have to as the form. But we split it off the host word. So here are some examples. Pakt, tedy, tiež, čeť, ktošť, mnohé, muť. There are many of them. And various parts of speech. But there are some words which exist in modern Czech and which seem like they may have been created this way. I don't know if all of them were, but definitely there is at the end, and if you cut it off, you will still have a Czech word. And here we definitely, because we have the continuum, so we don't want to split them in modern Czech now for some Q which otherwise doesn't exist almost. So we take them as lexicalized, and even in Old Czech we try not to touch them, but that's not absolute. So sometimes, for instance, byť is not a conjunction as in modern Czech, but it still is at a place where by as a conditional auxiliary would be expected, but it has this q anglicized on it, so then it will be split. But unless it's clear that it really should be separated, it will not be separated. So that's for q. There's one more phenomenon which looks similar, but to make things confusing, we don't do it the same way, and that's je. We don't analyze it the same way because it seems to be to have a narrower set of functions, and most of the time probably just emphasis, and also there's a much larger group of words where it appears, and some of them exist even in modern Czech, so it would be probably quite difficult or it is quite difficult to decide what to do with them. But because it's difficult and we don't know how consistent we can be, so at least we don't do the splitting, which is rather a large change in the data with consequences for processing. And instead, we just lemmatize it without the je, and we use a new feature, emphasis yes, which will mark that we cut off the je, as if it were some kind of inflectional morphology or whatever, just to mark that we did this in lemmatization. This is actually not completely our invention. Such a feature was already used in UD for some other languages, but probably for phenomena which are different from this one. So we reused it, and we can declare it as available for Czech, even though it's currently used only in the Old Czech data. And again, I have some examples here, like dřevněhož, meaning former adjective with the je at the end. And again, we have a table in the wiki that we maintain of cases which we consider lexicalized. And here we put on the lexicalized list all the pronouns. So even if kdož is something which you probably will not find in modern Czech data, we still treat it as lexicalized, and we don't lemmatize it to kdo. Sorry. And again, it's debatable, and the list of words which should not be lemmatized this way is probably the best thing we can do to at least maintain consistency. But I can imagine there, like if we have 10 people with opinion on that, there will be at least 5 different opinions of what should be there or not. Okay, so there's one more thing about tokenization for which I don't have too many examples, but there are examples, and that's the opposite way when we have multiple words, multiple orthographic words in Old Czech for something which would be spelled together as one word today, like kdokoliv, and now, okay, it could be ktokoliv or whatever spelling here, but the point is that koli is a separate word. And then there is a question, what do we do with it? So it's a particle, and it will be eventually in syntax connected to kdo, but we don't merge them together. That's the important thing, because that's not done in UD elsewhere either. So if you have multiple words which somehow behave like one word, then they are connected by dependencies, which we don't do here yet, but they are kept as separate tokens with their own annotation. I heard that there would be probably issues with prepositional phrases, which could be compound adverbs. Those are actually issues even modern Czech school students have to learn which words should be written together and which should be written as prepositional phrases with a space. I don't have examples because I didn't note them down when someone told me that, and I didn't see them recently in the data, but there would be things that should be written together today and would be written as separate prepositional phrases. So that's another thing. And now, so that was about tokenization, and now we are moving to lemmatization. That's another huge box of worms. Because it's not only about like picking the base form. Like in modern Czech, you would say, okay, I lemmatize. That means that I take the infinitive for the verb and I take the nominative singular for noun, and that's it. It's even there not so easy, but it's quite easy. Now, it also means that we have to normalize the orthography sometimes, even if the orthography is transcribed. It doesn't mean that you always have the same forms for the same word, especially if there would be different pronunciation, the assumed pronunciation for that. So for instance, in the Bible translation, in just the Dresden Bible and Olomouc Bible together had 3 different forms of John the Baptist, either křtitel or krstitel. And those are instances of the same word, so they probably should have the same lemma. And there are many things like that. And you will quickly run into questions, how far should we go? Because in the same Bible, you also, for Joseph, instead of Joseph, you have Oziet. And then in one other Bible edition, you will have Joseph already. Should they be lemmatized as the same word if they are so different optically? Those are questions which have no single easy answer. So again, we just have to maintain a list how the annotators resolve individual cases, and hopefully the other annotators will remember to do it the same way. And then it's not just about these things, but for some words you have many different forms, because it was long before the Institute for the Czech Language was here, so, or Ministry of Education or whatever. So it was not regulated. So there are many different forms how the scribes could write it down, and then how the modern editors should interpret it. So for instance, for the verb odsudí or odsudě, the present forms, they will, of future, they will condemn. We need the infinitive of this, but which one should we select? And there are at least these, there are probably more. But I took this, that's a merger of like 2 sources of morphological analyzers. So some of them are more suitable than the others, but again, we need some decision. And here's actually one more factor that comes into play. Should it be one of the long infinitives with the E at the end, which would be probably the more suitable thing for someone studying just the 14th century? Or should we actually use the modern lemma, odsoudit? And we decided to do this one. Both of them would be controversial, would have drawbacks for some groups of users. So here, obviously, we sort of ignored the wishes of people who were just focusing on Old Czech. But this would definitely be an advantage for a general user of the corpus search who does not know much or anything about Old Czech and who just wants to find all instances of odsoudit and may not even know that maybe odsouditi would be something you could come up with, but odsuditi, I'm not sure. And there are many other words where this would be a problem. So we decided to go for the modern lemma. Also because of UDPipe, because if we want to combine the modern models with the old models, and UDPipe will know the modern lemma, then learning that there are two lemmata for the same word, depending on the century, or maybe more than two, that would probably be quite problematic as well. Not that this is easy, because here it looks easy. We have the word odsoudit in modern Czech, and it's not a problem to see that it corresponds to those. But there are many words where it may be less obvious, or problematic, or even the word may not exist anymore. And if it's a word that disappeared, then what is the modern lemma? You could try to reverse engineer the phonological changes that are known to have happened. So that's one of the hints that we have for the annotators. Try to do that. And sometimes the result will not make much sense, but at least we try to be consistent and not to have like 14th century lemma for some words and modern lemma for some others. Here are some examples. So jmě is an old version of name instead of jméno, but I think it doesn't even have a full paradigm, does it? So some of the forms probably will look like jméno. I just picked some interesting examples from the wiki where we have a long list. So ješutenství would be like mechanically modernized to ješitenství, even though I didn't check it, but I suspect that it's probably not something that you would find in modern Czech data anyway. It probably would be ješitnost or something like that. There's the verb podvstati, so you would mechanically modernize it to podvstat, but it still doesn't exist. So in this case, probably the user who just searches for something, the user may look for something that ends in stat. So at least in that case, it would work. And in quite a few cases, the modernization or mapping to a modern equivalent would mean that you change the inflection class. So uvrci would be inflected according to different class than uvrhnout. Přijetí, accept instead of přijmout. Then you have adjectives which are either in the hard or soft inflection, cizí. Here it seems like clear because we know that in modern Czech we only have this, but what to do with obecní versus obecní, where we have both, the meaning is not so far apart, and it's not clear if you have an instance in the old Czech which one it was. Similarly, břich and břicho for belly, both of them exist in modern Czech, even though this one feels archaic, but it's not something that you never encounter. So in cases like this, we typically have, because these are, for instance, these differ in the gender. This one is masculine and this one is neuter. So the instructions here say, if the context tells you that it's clearly masculine, then use this one. If the context tells you the opposite or doesn't tell you anything or doesn't tell you enough, then use břicho because it's more frequent in the modern data. So sometimes we have decision chains like this. One more thing which is related to lemmatization, but not just lemmatization, is negation. That's just one of the many long discussions that we had. So if I look at, because it started as I was asked by the annotators, how should we lemmatize this? Should the negated word be lemmatized to the positive one or not? I said, well, we actually have the negation flag for many classes of words in PDT. So you probably should lemmatize it to the affirmative version and use the negative polarity as a feature. Then I looked at the data and I realized that I was a bit misguided because that was just my assumption for a long time because I knew we have negation and I knew that you could negate everything including proper nouns. But it doesn't mean that you will always find that in the data. So I looked at data and now an important note here is that's the Czech data PDT and universal dependencies until version 2.14, so until the previous one. Because this is one of the examples where we decided to change something as compared to what we do in modern Czech UD currently. And because we change it and because we still want to have as similar annotation as possible, so that it retroactively affected what I do in the modern Czech data, because I have the conversion from the original PDT annotation to UD. So I changed something even in UD beginning the release 2.15, which was just out a couple of weeks ago. So, but what was the original situation? For verbs, I think it's the least controversial thing that's productive. It might be controversial because it's traditionally, negation traditionally is regarded as derivation. So you would say that the negated verb is a different one from the affirmative one, but it's so productive that I think we've always treated it in PDT as something like inflection. You will lemmatize it to the affirmative infinitive, and you will have something that signifies negative polarity in the features. Adjectives are still pretty productive, even though whenever I want to come up with examples, I find that many of them are not so natural to me, because there is always the competition with antonyms. So instead of unpretty, I would want to say ugly, and even in Czech, not to speak about English. But hezký and nehezký definitely exist, both of them, and they are not unnatural. Unnatural is another example. So those are treated the same way as verbs, and that we didn't change that. Adverbs are a bit farther on the scale of naturality or unnaturality. Many of them are either derived from adjectives or behave similarly, like nezávisle, independently. That's lemmatized as závisle. There is a group of adverbs which had a different tag in PDT and was never had never a flag for polarity and also for degree. And I found out I wasn't able to explain to my colleagues how we define that group, because for me it was defined by not having the tag with polarity, but it was not like you see something else which would tell you polarity is not relevant. So one thing that we changed is that we started using polarity for all the adverbs. And then some of the adverb-like words are actually, they end up as determiner in UD, which is very unsatisfying, but there doesn't seem to be many better solutions. Those are quantifiers, pronominal quantifiers like mnoho, málo, několik, and so on. That's even though determiner doesn't exist in Czech, and we have slightly abused the category for other things anyway. But for quantifiers, it's a problem, but we don't have anything better anyway. So, but getting back here, it means that some of them can be negated as well, like neméně would be dead, but it's like an adverb, and it could be an adverb depending on context, and then it's no less. So that's negated as well. And we more or less kept that, or as I said, we even extended the set of adverbs which will get polarity as a possibility. And finally, nouns. And nouns seem to be the biggest problem, and also they were the biggest surprise to me, because only when I started doing the research for this discussion, I realized that there are actually many nouns which look like negated ones, but are not treated as just inflection, meaning they are not lemmatized to the affirmative version and signaled, the negation signaled by some feature. So when I looked in the data in PDT, there are things like nezávislost, neschopnost. These de-adjectival nouns were typical examples that would be treated as inflection. Also, deverbal nouns, nedodržení, non-observance, and so on. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything that has this ost at the end will be in this group, because in the second group, where you have the negated form as the lemma, and then it's marked as affirmative or positive, you also have things like nezaměstnanost, unemployment. I'm not sure if that's what I would do, but definitely some of them have a shift in meaning. So it's difficult to maintain that the negated form is really just negation of the meaning of the positive form. And again, there's a huge room for interpretation, what is correct, what not. So for instance, nesmysl, nonsense, as an opposition to smysl, sense, seems to be quite removed even in English. So there would be some reasoning behind this, but I think it was not consistent when I looked at the data. For instance, once at least I saw, do I have nemovitost here, the real estate? Here, at least once I saw it lemmatized as movitost, which would be something I wouldn't do. So there's room for inconsistency, and also it seemed like difficult to grasp for annotation. So we decided to remove this. So from now on, even in UD for modern Czech, there's no negation, no polarity feature for nouns, while we kept it for the others. So I think I actually have this. Oops, what was that? Okay. That was not the slide I wanted to see. There seems to be a slide which is invisible. Censored. Okay. Maybe I did too much to UD. Strange, but it knows it was there. Never mind, it's not so important. I've said almost everything that would be on the slide. Yeah. So that's not the only place actually where the discussions on Old Czech led to a change in the modern Czech data. But I think this is the biggest one so far, which I remember. So that's why I showed it. And now, finally, some of the features that we had to introduce because of Old Czech. Again, I think almost none of them was introduced to UD as such. Typically, they existed in UD for other languages. So simple past tenses, there are two of them, imperfect and aorist, or three, because aorist, there are two versions of aorist. But they were not annotated in modern Czech data, but they have been preserved in modern Bulgarian, for instance. So we know how it's annotated in Bulgarian. And they were in Old Czech Slavonic. And we know, because Old Czech Slavonic has a UD corpus, so we know how it's annotated there. So we essentially just picked the annotation and did the same thing. And here, so here the examples here again are often from the Bible. So to give you the modern translation, I typically reached for a modern translation of the Bible, which is why the translations are sometimes not so close to the Old Czech version as you might expect. And so there's the normal, I would say, periphrastic past tense using the active participle would be in modern translation, which means there will be verb form part as participle, while for the imperfect běše, the verb form is fin, like finite verb. And then also there is this special tense value imperfect, which again is used in some Slavic languages and some Romance languages. And it's different from aspect imperfect, because for instance, in Bulgarian, these two values doesn't have to be the same. So that's the annotation that we copied from other UD datasets. For aorist, here the example is pověděchu. So again, in modern Czech, you would at least say oni mu pověděli, to keep the same stem, but this translation actually has oni mu řekli. And again, we have finite verb here, but this time tense is not imperfect, but past, just past. We don't have a special label for aorist because past can be used, so why not use it? Why define a new thing? Especially aorist is problematic cross-linguistically because in Slavic languages, I think it's some kind of past tense always, while Turkish has the same term, but uses it for non-past, which is confusing at least. So we have past tense here. I will stop on aorist for one more slide. Because the aorist of the verb to be also functions as the conditional auxiliary, and even in modern Czech, we just don't call it aorist anymore. And also the forms are not exactly the same, but then I also don't have all the possible forms in the old Czech paradigm. I have just examples here. So it's there's clearly the development. But it was possible to use it as conditional auxiliary even in the old Czech data. So we have two problems here. One of them is that we have to distinguish by context whether it's conditional or not, because we want to keep the, now if we now have the annotation for aorist for other verbs, we want to keep it here as well. But if it's conditional, we want to have the same analysis as we would have for modern Czech conditional. So that's one thing that the annotators have to decide. And then another problem, which was actually the triggering one, which led us to discuss this, was that this B, if you just look at this table, seems to be third person. So I had in the modern Czech data third person originally. Again, I realized later that that was actually a mistake even in the modern Czech data, because even there it could occasionally be second person. If you have something like B says, then it's not third person. So it should be personless. And I was told that in the old Czech data, it's not just the aorist here, B and B for second and third person, but B could be just about anywhere all around the place. So they would have to decide it by context anyway. So we decided that the person will not be there. Then there is the dual number. Again, that is something we didn't really have to invent. Not only because many other UD languages have dual, but even modern Czech data have the dual annotation available, but it's only rarely used for fossilized forms of either paired body parts or instrumental form of adjectives that modify them. And I think it's not used anywhere else, not even for dvě stě, even though stě is also 200, that's also a special form. So we have the annotation, we just don't use it so frequently, while in Old Czech you will see it on verbal forms and noun inflection and everywhere. So if you have these like two brothers that were fishermen, so you have že běžta rybáře, these are dual forms, and we just use number dual and that's it. Then there is animacy. Animacy is not supposed to be so significant grammatically in the old data, because you would see endings, noun endings, which look like animate, and you would see them with words that are inanimate and vice versa. So there was a proposal not to annotate animacy at all. Then I said, well, okay, everything that should be deleted can be deleted later automatically. So let's try to keep it for now and at least maintain consistency with the UDPipe models. And we will see later if we decide that it really should have been deleted, we can do it. Converbs, which is a cross-linguistically used term for what we also know as gerunds or transgressives or přechodníky in Czech. Again, something which exists in modern Czech, but is very rarely found in the data, while it's very frequent in the old Czech data. So here is one example of a past or anterior converb or gerund. And we had another interesting discussion about this, because some authors would claim that the converb in Old Czech had also forms for case. Or I think the actual claim by Gebauer or someone was that there could be an accusative form. And but when an accusative, it means because there are instances where the converb is not coreferential with the subject of the main clause, but with some kind of object or something else. Like here, he will not see the Son of Man who is coming in his kingdom. So Son of Man is an accusative, and there is actually a different form of this converb, which led the people to claim that this form is for accusative. But when looking at the data, we found out that there are even already in the 14th century, that there are many variants of the forms, maybe because the scribes already didn't know how to use it properly because it was fading out. And some of them would call even for dative, if you look at what it's coreferential with. So in the end, we decided that we would get better off if we just don't use the case feature with converbs. So that was the decision. And was this the last thing I have is actually it's a problem which is still open because we just discussed it 1 month ago, started when I found it in the data, is supine, which again is something that existed in older Slavic languages and gradually disappeared or was merged with the infinitive. And now there's a question, what should we do? Because supine, again, exists in UD because it was preserved in modern Slovenian. So we could do verb form equals sup. It's just not currently allowed for Czech. The validator will flag it as an error. So I could allow it, but we are discussing whether it makes sense. So supine is essentially looks like modern infinitive, but even in Old Czech, it doesn't have this t at the end. So that makes it different from the old infinitive. And it's used with verbs of motion when you go somewhere to do something. So that something will be in that form. And so now the open question we have is, first, how will we recognize it? Because they're probably, even in the Old Czech data, as I was told, it's not always clear that this form will be used. But it seems like there are clear criteria, like the motion verb and other things, which will tell you whether it should be the case. But then the bigger question is, if I say in this continuum we have supine, so how do we recognize that we suddenly don't have it? Like, I don't know, from the 1st January of 1500, there's no more supine by law, now it's infinitive. So we tentatively, we let the annotators annotate it because, again, deleting it is easy, but reconstructing it once the annotation was done is not easy. And if we keep it, we may have to end up with some decision like that. So they say, okay, in Old Czech, it seems clear. And Old Czech has some artificially set boundary. I think it is actually 1500. So then we may also have to say in Middle Czech, we no longer annotate it. Or maybe we do and we don't annotate it in the 19th century. So that's open question. I'm not saying this is the final decision, but again, we took the path which will allow us to change it automatically in the end. And okay, I have a summary. Okay, it's not censored. So that's all. To summarize, we are trying to get 100,000 words, slightly larger gold standard for Old Czech, and we hope to have the same later for Middle Czech. And in the meantime, the Czech National Corpus team is working on the 19th century, two etalons. And at the end of the project, we hope to have it all. So those are the 3 teams working concurrently. And we had many decisions to take, and one of them was that we will use the modern lemma, and we have the multiple tokens for tokenization, and I showed you many morphological features. Thank you.
So many details one would not think of before being the work that was really amazing. Well, there are many questions in chat, so I expect you don't have questions.
But before you come up with an idea, have you considered, you mentioned how to adapt the parser UniPy for this object so that you would create artificial synthetic all data by using the current like EDT, but making it older, but there you know the gold annotation. So for example, adding converbs or making the more or orthography like older, even not always maybe the correct one, or possibly what we found when preparing the poetry tree bank would make the biggest amount of problems, especially for the parser, but actually it affects also the morphology, changing the word order, which could be done easily.
Short answer, I haven't. Mainly because like I didn't have time to consider all the possibilities yet, but also there is a big room for improvement the standard way still. Because right now I don't even have the retrained model on the first 10 files of old Czech. And I assume there will be a significant jump once I do that. And also, it's not just about these newly annotated data, but also, as you know, the model contains contextual word embeddings on the multilingual, for Czech, actually not multilingual, I think it's Czech Roberta, which is on billions of web-based texts for modern Czech, or mostly modern Czech. So for that, I could actually use the old Czech data, which was not annotated, but it is still raw data, where the model could see all the texts that are available and at least learn that these are also the words that could appear somewhere. I don't know whether it's a converb, but it's at a position which might be a converb because of my knowledge from the annotated data. So I think there's still many things that can be done before I try to artificially create something which looks like old Czech. Then I will probably ask ChatGPT and tell him, please translate Mada frontadnes for me to old Czech.
What was the transcription rule set that you used? Was it the usual one that the Institute of Czech Language uses mostly, or was there any discussion around the standard of normalizing orthography?
That discussion definitely did not occur when I was around. It's my understanding that I don't know, Martin, if you know how this is normally done, but
Yeah, transcriber rules exist from Old Czech, and it's depend from man who is doing this transcription. So rules are, but there are individual differences, maybe.
I have a curiosity. When you mentioned that you retrain the model on the data, you mean old Czech, or you try to combine with also modern Czech? I mean, modern and old, or
I definitely try to combine it because you have, it has to be balanced, but modern Czech has having lots of data, and always when you have more data, it should be better. And then old Czech will provide the knowledge of what's different in old Czech. But the balance that you have to find is in how much modern Czech data will still help you. Because if there is too much, it will overweight the old Czech information. So in the experiment which I did before this project started, which I mentioned here with the numbers that I had, I actually found out that if I combine these 1,600 words of old Czech that I had with the fiction tree bank, which is 160,000 words, and more suitable domain because it was the Bible and fiction, so I think it's better. It worked and it improved the thing a lot. But if I did the same thing with PDT, which is order of magnitude larger, it's over 1 million words, it didn't help. Not that it would be so bad, but you didn't see any improvement anymore because it was too much information in the language which is so different that it doesn't help.
So I have few questions. I'll try to put it quickly. The first question that I have is that, do you also have English translations for the sentences in the tree bank?
No.
Okay. Do you plan to do it?
No, not me. And I don't think we have, in the project, we don't have capacity for that. It would be great, I think. Yeah. And one thing that I actually tried with one sentence, just out of curiosity, and Lenka knows about it, is that I used Google Translate. I gave it an old Czech sentence. I translated it to English. For that particular sentence, I got reasonable translation to English. And when you translate it back, you even get the modern Czech version of that. So it lost something. It was not fully grammatical. It still is visible that it has difficulties in understanding what was there. But because of the huge model it has, Google has of Czech and all the combinations of words that can be there and various spelling variations, it was able to understand even the old forms. Maybe it even saw some of them because they are available on the web. And we don't know what Google search. So maybe it saw even the vocabulary webový and these things, and it actually has some model of Old Czech. Yeah, so you could do it with translation, but we don't do it, and I don't think it will be in the data. Like, I don't see this coming into intercorp because for that it would have to be translated manually.
Okay. So the other one is with respect to tokenization. You said that there are tokens like Kdo and Koli being separate, but in modern Czech it's together.
Mm-hmm.
So in the old Czech tree bank, do you somehow label it, maybe in the misc column, or I mean, like,
you mean it's incorrect or
like,
because if you encounter this in modern Czech data, it will be flagged as incorrect spelling.
okay,
Quite rightly so, because now it's supposed to be written together. But before, I don't know which date exactly, there is no notion of incorrect spelling. People just write as they see fit. So you cannot say it's an error, and then you probably have to annotate it as such. And then it means that I probably will not have anything to put in the misc column, or unless you want me to put the really modernized version of everything.
maybe.
Okay, nice idea. Give me the funding and I will find people to do it.
I think my Gauck won't cover it, sorry.
Yeah.
And the other one that you mentioned was about the semantic shift with respect to the nouns being negated.
Mm-hmm.
So your deduction comes from your knowledge, or did you find the counter translations in the old Czech?
No, it's in this case, these two slides about negation, or the one that you saw and the one that was hidden by the device here, they were discussing mostly my findings on modern Czech. So they didn't even show a single old Czech example. I could find some, but the discussion was mainly about what do we do with negation in the annotation. And then I said, yeah, I know what we do in modern Czech. And then I looked in the data and I decided I don't know. So, you know, so that was, but to your point, it really is my intuition whether the meaning shifted enough or not. But I didn't do the annotation, which was there. So I could agree or disagree with particular decisions, but my main point was that they don't seem to be consistent enough.
Okay. Maybe if you give me the funding, I can do that for you.
Okay.
Yes, so that's it. Thank you.
So can we have some more questions?
I don't know anything about Old Czech, but considering the negation, we are currently annotating negation in our Valency lexicon of Czech nouns and adjectives in non-Valex, and in the new release, which will be out at the end of this year, the annotation will be annotated very, very precisely, I would say, and we differentiate direct negation, which you call inflection, and lexicalized negation, which you call derivation. And I can say that about 80% of our data, which are more or less abstract nouns and adjectives, allow direct negation. So I know, I think that it will probably not help you currently, but maybe you can look at our annotation, how we differentiate it and how it is annotated according to corpus data. We also annotate how frequent the negation is, whether it is standard or very rare, or sometimes even more frequent than the affirmative form. So just, I'm not sure it can help you, but just.
It's interesting anyway. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Good to know.
Well, so I don't see anybody here and online. Can you see somebody? No. Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation and for opening the eyes of at least some of us, of me certainly. Thank you for coming, and let me invite you for the last session before Christmas next Monday. And as I said, it will be again from ÚFAL, a contribution on multilinguality, at least in relation to machine translation. So thank you for coming and see you next week.